Carl Jung discovered something most empaths were never told. You were not designed to be a permanent hospital for the world's pain. You were designed to make the world aware that the pain exists. That difference changes everything. The sorrow you absorb is not a debt you must pay down with your life. It is a signal. The darkness you feel pressing against your chest is not a flaw. It is evidence that your nervous system is in contact with material the rest of society refuses to process. Jung would call this collective shadow. Grief, no one grieved. Rage, no one confessed shame that generations hid and then taught their children to hide better. When an empath touches this material, they think, "I'm broken." Jung's answer is colder and truer. You're not broken. You're the mirror. Picture how this begins. A room ordinary on the surface. Voices are calm. Faces are polite. Inside your body, alarms are going off. Your hands pick up static that nobody else hears. Your stomach tightens as if you've swallowed a storm. You don't have evidence. You have resonance. Someone at the table is carrying a story they won't tell, and your system is carrying it for them. You leave confused, heavy, and a little angry with yourself. Later, someone says, "You're so sensitive." They mean it as critique. You take it as a sentence. Years pass. You try to be less porous, less moved, less aware. You fail. The emotions keep coming. You conclude the worst. Something is wrong with me. The turn arrives when a second thought replaces the first. What if what I'm feeling isn't mine? Jung called empaths wounded mirrors, not because they heal what they reflect, but because they bleed when a culture refuses to look. The mirror's job is not surgery. The mirror's job is accuracy, and accuracy is disruptive. Families are built on unspoken agreements. Workplaces run on reputational fictions. Entire cultures depend on collective denials to keep the machinery moving. Your existence interrupts those contracts. You register the unregistered. You name the unnamed. You are a walking audit of the feelings everyone else wrote off. Jung warned that people will do anything to avoid facing their own soul. That avoidance has structure. Psychologically, it is projection. The unconscious exports what it will not own. The anger a person refuses to feel becomes your anxiety. The shame they will not acknowledge becomes your self-doubt. The grief they never buried becomes the heaviness you can't explain. This isn't kindness. It's physics. Psyche, like nature, abhors a vacuum. What is repressed does not disappear. It finds a carrier. Sensitive nervous systems become the carrier class. This is why so many empaths spend years trying to heal themselves for symptoms that don't originate inside them. They meditate harder, journal deeper, fast, longer, study trauma, endlessly perform spiritual cleanses, and still wake up saturated. Because the material moving through them is not merely personal, much of it is ancestral, cultural, archetypal. Jung divided the psyche into layers: personal, unconscious, and collective unconscious. He observed that some people, particularly those with thin boundaries and symbol-rich intuition, act like membranes between the two. They don't just empathize with individuals, they resonate with the zeitgeist. They are early warning systems for a family, a community, a nation. That function is sacred and dangerous. Sacred because consciousness expands wherever truth is clearly reflected. Dangerous because systems built on denial retaliate against the mirror. You've lived this. You name an elephant in the room and suddenly you are dramatic. You point to a pattern and become the problem. You cry the tears no one else will cry and are labeled unstable. The group's survival strategy is simple: keep the mirror, but punish the reflection. You become closeted scapegoat kept near for your sensing ability, blamed when that sensing reveals what others cannot tolerate. The message is contradictory. Help us feel and don't make us feel. You cannot win inside that double bind. You can only recognize it and step out. Jung's language for the bind was participation mystique, an unconscious fusion between you and the collective field. In that fusion, responsibility gets scrambled. You begin to believe you are the origin of what you are merely registering, anxiety with no discernible cause. Check the room, not just your childhood. Shame that spikes around certain people. Ask what they cannot say aloud. Numbness after social contact. You may have absorbed a group's backlog of unprocessed grief. None of this absolves you of personal work. It calibrates it. The task is not to fix the feeling, but to assign it correctly. Whose is this? What layer is it from personal, familial, cultural, human? Assignment requires literacy. Think of it as shadow literacy. The ability to differentiate kinds of darkness. Personal darkness, the history your body remembers. Familial darkness, the patterns your lineage rehearsed because survival demanded it. Cultural darkness. The scripts your society performs while insisting it is enlightened. Human darkness, archetypal contents, rage, envy, greed, despair that belong to the species itself. Empaths who can't distinguish these layers drown. Empaths who learn to read them stop confusing reception with identity. What moves through me is not me. That sentence is oxygen. Here is the hardest part to accept. You were never meant to permanently metabolize the collective's waste. You were meant to render it visible. Jung's most subversive line applies here. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Your nervous system is a lantern. The point of light is not to absorb the cave, it is to reveal it. When you collapse under the cave, it is not personal failure, it is shadow saturation. The moment a body carrying generations of ungrieved material hits capacity. It looks like depression, feels like anxiety, mimics burnout. Underneath it is an initiation, the psyche forcing a split between who you are and what you carry. During shadow saturation, the self often retreats, and a provisional carrier self steps forward, highly functional, strangely numb, always tired. That substitution is the psyche's emergency strategy. It keeps you moving while preventing total system overload. The danger is forgetting the substitution happened. If you start believing the carrier self is your identity, you will organize your entire life around other people's unresolved material. You will choose relationships that need carrying. You will pick jobs that reward carrying. You will call it love-service calling. Jung would call it identification with an archetypal function confusing your person with your role. To break identification, your awareness must change role too, from sponge to sensor, from absorber to reflector. This is not a motivational slogan, it is an operational shift. Sponges hoard, sensors relay, absorbers drown in the data. Reflectors translate the data into images, words, song, ritual boundaries. Jung's method for making that shift was active imagination. A disciplined conversation with the unconscious through writing, drawing, movement, prayer, until what was amorphous becomes form. When pain has form, you can lay it down. Do not miss the second half of the instruction. Form without boundary turns you back into a conduit for everyone's storm. Boundaries are not walls. They are membranes with rules. What enters must be named. What is named must move. What moves must leave. Ritualize the rules. Before a difficult conversation, write 3 sentences that define what is yours and what is not. After contact with heavy fields, wash your hands in cold water and say out loud, "What belongs to you returns to you with mercy." Before sleep, place one hand on your chest and one on your abdomen and ask, "Who am I if nothing foreign is inside me?" Feel the baseline. Return to it often. You will be told that this is selfish. You will be accused of abandoning people when you stop carrying their unlived life. Understand the mechanics when a mirror stops absorbing projections boomerang. The person who needed you to carry their anger will either feel it or blame you for refusing to. That reaction is not a sign you are wrong. It is evidence your reflection is accurate. Some will integrate. Many will reject. Your job is neither outcome. Your job is fidelity to truth within and without. Empaths who accept this job mirror rather than medic become what Jung implied, but never named, shadow awakeners. Their presence catalyzes the only kind of healing the unconscious respects, the kind that begins with recognition. Recognition is costly. It breaks social contracts built on don't ask, don't feel. It ends relationships that were actually agreements to stay asleep together. It changes careers that were reward systems for emotional anesthesia. It moves you from rooms where you were useful to rooms where you are free. Freedom introduces a new discipline, appropriate detachment, care without custody, witness without ownership, love without carrying. This is not coldness, it is precision. Precision lets you stay human while serving an archetypal function. Without it, your gift devours you and the culture loses its mirror. With it, your sensitivity turns into language the collective can finally understand, poems that lift the lid on grief, research that names a hidden pattern, boundaries that model adulthood, silence that refuses to collude. If you've spent your life haunted by the line, "I feel too much," replace it with a truer sentence, "I perceive what others refuse to process." Then add the sentence that saves empaths from martyrdom. I am not the container. I am the revealer. Carl Jung warned that when a person becomes too identified with what he called an archetypal function, the human self begins to vanish beneath the weight of the symbol. For empaths, this danger hides behind noble words: service, compassion, healing. The unconscious world adores its healers as long as they never wake up. The moment you realize you are not here to endlessly absorb, but to expose, the contract breaks. The same people who praised your sensitivity will flinch from your clarity. They didn't want awareness. They wanted anesthesia. This is why Jung said the empath's crisis is not psychological weakness, but initiation. The breakdown comes when the nervous system can no longer lie for the collective. What you call exhaustion is the psyche's revolt against unconscious servitude. You feel it as panic, apathy, disconnection. Underneath, something deeper is organizing itself, a boundary trying to be born. The empath's task is to shift from involuntary absorption to conscious participation. To feel what moves through, but not mistake that movement for self. This transition is violent. The ego screams because its identity was built on being needed. The mirror wants to keep reflecting even when the glass is cracked. Jung offered a map for this passage: active imagination, creative ritual, deliberate solitude. Expression transforms possession. Write the dream that won't leave you. Paint the color of someone else's sadness until it becomes pigment, not poison. Speak aloud the sentence that has lived in your throat for years. When the unconscious is given form, it no longer needs to hijack the body. Art becomes alchemy, the transmutation of absorbed emotion into shared awareness. Jung wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity." For empaths, play is sacred work. It breaks the spell of passive suffering. As this expression deepens, a new identity appears: the shadow translator. This is the empath who has learned to read darkness without drowning in it. They no longer call every ache their own. They catalog, interpret, release. They see how sorrow changes texture, depending on its origin. Family grief vibrates differently than cultural shame. Ancestral guilt feels heavier than personal regret. They become fluent in these dialects of pain. Shadow translators don't deny suffering. They contextualize it. They can sit beside despair and recognize whether it belongs to this room or to a century. That recognition alone is liberation. Modern psychology is slowly catching up. Studies on vicarious trauma and emotional contagion confirm what Jung saw 100 years ago. The empath's body is a social sensor. Mirror neurons light up as if they're living another's experience. The difference between trauma and transformation lies in awareness. Awareness inserts distance, and distance restores agency. When you know what you're carrying, you can put it down. Jung called this conscious suffering, feeling fully without identification. The pain still burns, but it no longer consumes oxygen meant for your own soul. The next phase begins with a quieter realization. Healing was never the point. Integration was. Healing seeks to erase. Integration seeks to include. The empath who tries to erase darkness becomes its prisoner. The one who includes it becomes its translator. The collective cannot evolve until someone gives language to what it hides. You are that language. Every time you name what others deny: addiction, hypocrisy, fear, you release psychic pressure from the whole. It doesn't make you a saint. It makes you accurate. This is the empath's real gift. Precision of perception. Jung said the unconscious can only become conscious when it finds a form that the intellect can understand. You are that form, flesh-made understanding. But precision requires discernment. You must know when to speak and when silence says more. Not every truth belongs in public. Not every wound needs witness. Conscious empathy means choosing when to translate and when to rest. Translation without rest turns prophets into patients. Eventually, a pattern reveals itself. Every empath who survives their own initiation becomes a teacher of boundaries. Not by preaching them, but by embodying them. People feel safer around you, not because you absorb their chaos, but because you don't. Your stillness becomes mirror and container at once. They see their reflection and their potential for integration. You model what Jung called individuation, the movement from unconscious participation to conscious choice. The world learns by watching you stay whole in the presence of fragmentation. You'll notice that as you integrate, the type of people drawn to you changes. Where once you attracted crisis and confession, you now attract curiosity and collaboration. The frequency shifts from dependency to dialogue. That's how the collective begins to awaken, one relationship at a time, evolving out of projection. Jung said the greatest service to the world is to become a fully realized individual. When you live that truth, your energy teaches without effort. Presence becomes pedagogy. You are no longer the empath who saves. You are the mirror that invites salvation. Carl Jung observed that when consciousness reaches a certain depth, it begins to affect the collective field around it. He called this the transcendent function, the mysterious bridge that links inner transformation to outer change. When an empath becomes aware of their true role as a shadow awakener, this bridge activates. Their mere presence starts to shift the psychological climate of the spaces they inhabit. Families argue differently, truths surface unexpectedly, people begin to confess what they've hidden for years. It isn't magic, it's resonance. The unconscious recognizes itself in a person who refuses to lie. But here is the cost of that resonance. To a world addicted to repression, your clarity feels like exposure. People who have spent lifetimes avoiding their own darkness experience you as a threat. They might accuse you of being negative, dramatic, or manipulative, anything to discredit the mirror. Jung said that the shadow always resists integration because the ego fears annihilation. So the more accurate your reflection, the stronger the resistance you'll face. Understanding this prevents bitterness. They aren't rejecting you. They're rejecting premature visibility. You've become the messenger who delivers a letter they never asked to read. Shadow awakeners walk a narrow path between revelation and rejection. Too much light and people go blind. Too little and the darkness wins. Jung's guidance was paradoxical: stay close enough to illuminate, far enough not to be consumed. He called this balance appropriate detachment. It means caring without claiming, witnessing without wounding yourself. The mature empath learns to stand at the edge of others' transformation without jumping in. They offer a steady gaze instead of rescue. That gaze, unflinching, compassionate, exact, is the most powerful therapy the unconscious knows. To sustain this role, sacred boundaries become your nervous system's architecture. They are not defenses, they are design. Physical boundaries protect your body's rhythm. Emotional boundaries separate empathy from enmeshment. Mental boundaries keep you from adopting collective thought patterns as truth. Spiritual boundaries remind you that you are a participant in the world's healing, not its sole carrier. Without these membranes, participation mystique returns, and the empath dissolves back into the crowd's unconscious tide. With them, your sensitivity evolves from porousness into precision. Jung understood that individuals who carry archetypal energies, prophets, artists, healers, pay a psychological price. Their insights isolate them. Their presence destabilizes existing hierarchies of denial. Yet he also believed these individuals are essential for the species. Man's task, he wrote, is to become conscious of the contents that press upward from the unconscious. The shadow awakener fulfills that task on behalf of the many. Every act of clarity, every poem that names despair, every painting that reveals suffering, every conversation that interrupts false harmony is an act of evolution. Still, there is danger in the very power that makes this possible. Jung warned about inflation, identifying so completely with archetypal energy that one begins to mistake the archetype for the self. For shadow awakeners, inflation appears as saviorism, the belief that they must liberate everyone. It's subtle, seductive, and lethal. The more people resist awakening, the more you might double your effort to awaken them. Eventually, the effort becomes coercion disguised as compassion. The antidote is humility before mystery. You are a catalyst, not the cause. Transformation belongs to each soul. The mirror does not choose who looks into it. This humility gives birth to balance. You begin to honor both your human and archetypal identities. The human self needs rest, laughter, ordinary conversation, the simple grounding of daily life. The archetypal function requires solitude, reflection, and ritual. Neglect one and the other collapses. Jung said that individuation demands the union of opposites to be both divine and domestic, infinite and finite, wounded and whole. The shadow awakener who learns this balance becomes steady enough to carry the collective without confusing it for themselves. They can descend into the underworld and return with language instead of scars. Eventually, your work shifts from confrontation to embodiment. You stop trying to convince anyone of anything. You simply live transparently. Authenticity itself becomes activism. People feel it before they understand it. They begin to sense that repression isn't strength, that vulnerability isn't weakness. You start noticing subtle changes. Someone pauses before gossiping. Another apologizes without being asked. A group that once mocked your intensity now asks for your insight. These are micro-awakenings, the nervous system of the collective recalibrating around honesty. Jung believed that culture evolves not through ideologies, but through individuals who make consciousness contagious, and that contagion begins with presence. The integrated empath radiates what can't be faked, quiet coherence. Others feel safer to face their own contradictions, because you've already made peace with yours. That's why shadow awakeners are simultaneously magnetic and intimidating. They broadcast a frequency of truth that forces calibration. Some rise to meet it, others flee. You can't control who chooses which. The task is to remain the frequency, not chase results. Jung called this stage the wise fool, aware of how little can be controlled, yet devoted to staying conscious anyway. When you reach that equilibrium, compassion stops being sentiment and becomes structure. You no longer confuse kindness with compliance. You understand that saying no can be more healing than saying yes. You recognize that silence, too, is medicine. You begin to love without rescuing, to teach without preaching, to heal without absorbing. This is conscious mastery, the point where sensitivity and sovereignty finally coexist. From here, every interaction becomes alchemy. You don't eliminate darkness. You midwife it into form. You don't destroy illusion. You make truth unavoidable. And in doing so, you fulfill Jung's oldest prophecy that the evolution of humanity depends on the courage of a few who dare to face what others will not. Jung often said that the world will change when enough individuals choose to carry light consciously, rather than unconsciously serve darkness. For the awakened empath, that light is not gentle, it's surgical. You've learned that awareness cuts. It exposes infection before it can heal. And once you begin living as a mirror instead of a sponge, your reflection becomes contagious. People start seeing themselves in your steadiness. They begin to suspect that their own sensitivity might not be weakness either. This is how collective transformation begins, one nervous system refusing to participate in denial. At this stage, the loneliness returns, but differently. Before it was the loneliness of being misunderstood. Now it's the solitude required for calibration. Jung wrote that the hermit phase is never punishment, it's digestion. After absorbing years of unprocessed emotion, you need space to metabolize clarity. You'll feel the urge to retreat from noise, to create, to let silence shape meaning. Follow it. The unconscious speaks softly once chaos subsides. In these quiet intervals, the material you once carried begins to reorganize itself into art insight service. Many shadow awakeners discover their vocation here, writing counseling, music, activism. The content varies, but the structure is the same. What once broke you becomes what you offer. During this solitude, you start to see your journey from above. Every breakdown was a border crossing, every collapse a doorway into another layer of consciousness. What you called oversensitivity was apprenticeship. You were learning the textures of collective emotion so that one day you could navigate them deliberately. The skills remain, but now they belong to awareness, not anxiety. Jung said, "You are what you do not, what you say you'll do." The empath who keeps integrating their shadow stops talking about awakening and simply lives awake. Presence becomes instruction. As consciousness stabilizes, your relationships shift again. Projection-based dynamics lose their grip. You no longer attract those who need you to carry what they refuse to see. Instead, you encounter people who mirror your awareness back to you. These are your true allies, individuals capable of mutual consciousness. Together, you form what Jung called the creative minority, the small clusters of awake minds through which evolution enters culture. Each conversation becomes a laboratory for new ways of being human. You disagree without hostility, feel deeply without drowning, and love without ownership. In these exchanges, collective consciousness rehearses its next form. Still, resistance persists. Collective denial is ancient, profitable, and loud. The world rewards numbness with stability, distraction with belonging, projection with moral superiority. Shadow awakeners threaten these economies simply by staying lucid. You will be told to calm down, to be positive, to stop overthinking. You'll recognize these phrases for what they are: defense mechanisms of a culture terrified of its own reflection. Don't waste energy fighting them. Your job is to embody an alternative, not to argue for it. Revolution through example, not explanation. Jung wrote, "Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses." Liberation comes from acceptance, and you've become fluent in that language. Over time, something unexpected happens. You stop needing to be understood at all. You begin to enjoy mystery again. You realize that your role was never to explain the unconscious perfectly, but to remain in dialogue with it. Every day becomes participation in a larger psyche, listening, responding, shaping. The boundary between personal and collective fades, replaced by cooperation. Jung called this participation mystique. In its conscious form, a partnership between self and world. You sense when to act and when to yield, when to speak and when to let silence teach. This is mastery without control, leadership without domination. In this maturity, even darkness changes meaning. What once terrified you now feels sacred. Pain becomes information. Conflict becomes initiation. You stop labeling emotions as positive or negative. They're simply currents within the same sea. Shadow integration has completed its cycle. Fear transforms into awareness, awareness into compassion, compassion into presence. And presence, clear, grounded, undefended, is the rarest medicine on earth. People around you begin to heal without understanding why. Jung described this as kindling a light in the darkness of mere being. That light is not metaphor. It is transmission. Look at your path now, from absorber to mirror, from mirror to awakener, from awakener to translator, from translator to embodiment. This is the arc of conscious evolution. The empath who once mistook sensitivity for sickness becomes the prototype of a new kind of human, one who feels collectively but responds individually, who carries shadow without collapsing beneath it. You no longer try to fix the world. You reveal it, love it, and in doing so transform it. So when the weight returns, and it will remember the order, feel, name, release, rest. Do not confuse carrying with caring. Do not trade authenticity for approval, and never apologize for clarity. The world has enough comfort. What it lacks is consciousness. Jung believed that every epoch chooses its healers through its wounds. You were chosen through yours. You were never born merely to heal others. You were born to awaken what sleeps inside them, to make the collective shadow visible not through judgment, but through being fully alive in its presence. Your sensitivity was the summons. Your suffering was the training. Your awareness is the revolution. Welcome to your true function, Shadow Awakener. The world is finally ready to see what you've been feeling all along. See you in the next dimension.